In the misty twilight of European history of the 16th to 17th centuries, there were disturbing whispers about the terrible machinations of witches. Fear-filled houses and courtyards, entire villages were seized with panic when someone was accused of black magic. Crowds of people were bustling around the witch hunters because in the dusty squares they believed in almost everything. In family curses, talking black cats, and that a moody old woman could influence the weather with her broom. And in the midst of these fires, bonfires of thought contradicted bonfires of flame. Great minds lived outside the windows, who could not help but hear the cries of ignorance. Their philosophical light was slowly but inexorably breaking through the darkness of superstition. The socio-political storm preceded and accompanied the era of the witch hunt. Against the background of the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, Europe was split into two camps. Wars and epidemics reigned from the plague to the cold Little Ice Age, and the people longed for simple explanations. It is no coincidence that from about the 15th to the 18th century, a wave of tragedies swept through the most troubled regions, especially in Germany, Switzerland, Scotland, and Scandinavia. According to modern estimates, about 100,000 trials were held over 3 centuries, and 40 to 50,000 people were sentenced to burning. About 3/4 of the victims were women. Churches and states have taken on the mission of cleansing society from the devil's infection. Treatises like The Witch's Hammer, 1486, were written, which described in detail the ways to search for demonic marks on the body and disperse covens. In rural communities, the ashes became a place of intimidation. Many believed that a cauldron of potions standing under the windows and an old woman with a staff on her shoulder were the real enemies of the family, but the panic faded as quickly as it arose. After a tumultuous century of violent trials, in the 17th century, judges went on strike. Witches were increasingly found innocent. Passions were inflamed by the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, and the Stuart civil strife, when people were willing to believe anything to explain the tragedies. It was into this burning hell of superstition that great philosophical scientists and thinkers came, who tried to save humanity from itself with the help of reason and science. Johann Weyer, 1515 to 1588. While many women were thrown into the water and burned, German-Dutch doctor Johann Weyer was the first to declare, "Witches are not witches, but sick women." In 1563, he published a treatise on the tricks of demons, in which he argued in detail that the curses attributed to witches were just a figment of the imagination, inspired by the devil himself and not a real force. Weyer referred to the ancient wisdom of Hippocrates. The world is governed by natural laws, and storms or illnesses can be explained by natural phenomena, not the machinations of evil spirits. When, in 1548, he was summoned to the trial of a girl, the favorite of the Duke of Cleves, he recognized her not as a witch, but as a hysterical woman, and expressed regret that people resorted to torture instead of treatment. His book reverses all ideas. Weyer argues that searches for devil's scars are absurd, and those who are called witches should be treated, not burnt. He was ridiculed and persecuted for these ideas, but the seeds of reason sprang up. 100 years later, the Dutchman Balthazar Bekker joined his arguments. Francis Bacon, 1561 to 1626. The English visionary and founder of the scientific method considered superstition as an idol of reason that prevents one from seeing the world as it is. He did not write directly about the witch hunt, but metaphorically called for the banishment of false idols, including the fear of spirits. Bacon is convinced that only empirical observations and experiments will purify knowledge from the mystical dust that obscures the eye. His philosophy paved the way for a new science, free from prejudice and the royal slumber of the Inquisition. René Descartes, 1596 to 1650. At the beginning of the 17th century, the young Descartes, torn between military campaigns and academic debates, sees women being burned on the hills of Austria and Bavaria on charges of witchcraft. But he himself questions everything that is possible. His famous cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I exist. He is born in silence under the cold moon, far from the campfires. Descartes opens a new path. He considers clear and distinct ideas, tested by reason, not prejudice, to be the only unshakable foundation of knowledge. In the discourse on method, he calls for rejecting any teachings that do not stand up to criticism. For Descartes, stories about witches are just a small part of a huge feast of truth, and science and mathematics should scare them away. His companions in the Netherlands, seeing how this holy warrior of reason enters into discussions with fellow pastors, would later say Descartes would rather send a cat against a demon than believe in witchcraft. Until the end of his life, he confidently followed the path of discovery. He studied optics and built psychology, not allowing fear to penetrate into his research. Thomas Hobbes, 1588 to 1679. Hobbes, an Englishman, also lived during the great upheavals of the English Civil War, when every religious group promised hell or heaven. He wrote Leviathan, 1651, after stormy years of wandering around Europe. In his book, Hobbes criticizes obscurantism. He notes that many believe in the supernatural not because there's evidence, but because one cunning man, with the help of another trinity of literates, deceived the people. As for witches, Hobbes wrote, wisdom consists in believing what reason confirms. Everything else is superstition. He believed that fear and mysticism were convenient weapons in the hands of despots. Fear of demons made a person a timid subject. Hobbes wrote that if society were freed from superstitious horror, it would become more docile and tolerant. Let a powerful sovereign serve as his material authority, and in his soul there is a mind that rejects a witch as well as an inappropriate shadow. Benedict Baruch Spinoza, 1632 to 1677. An atmosphere of religious intolerance prevailed around Spinoza. The young man was expelled from the Jewish community of Amsterdam for heresy, and he liked to wear a mask or with a woven bag on his head so as not to be afraid of the views of the rabbis. But even in isolation, he wrote boldly. For Spinoza, God is not a vengeful old man with a beard, but nature itself, and everything in the world is subject to strict, necessary laws. Anything that doesn't fit into this picture is just the fruit of fear and ignorance. In the correspondence, he clearly explained, I see the main difference between religion and superstition. Superstition is based on ignorance, while faith is based on knowledge. Spinoza noted that superstitious people try to control others not with the help of the light of reason, but with the help of fear. They teach us to run away from evil, not to strive for good, he wrote bitterly. His rationalism was revolutionary. His belief in witches and demons seemed to him a relic of barbarism that prevents people from living freely. Spinoza showed that by believing in a creepy fairy tale, we ourselves become its slaves. Galileo and Giordano Bruno. Although they were not philosophers in the strict sense of the word, their fates show what new thinking is worth. Bruno, 1548 to 1600, predicted that the earth is not the center of the universe, and paid for it with a bonfire, the sad fate of free thought. Galileo, 1564 to 1642, became convinced that heaven obeys the laws, not the decrees of the church, and under pressure from the cardinals was forced to whisper, and yet it turns. Their examples reminded us that for the victory of reason, it is not enough just not to be afraid to pay for the truth. Balthasar Becker, 1634 to 1698. The Dutch theologian Becker, a disciple of Descartes and a brave pastor, completes the era of new thinkers. In 1691, when the fear of witches still reigned around, he published The Enchanted World. Becker states, "The Bible talks about the devil, but nothing more. Only God rules the world. To ascribe such power to the devil is ridiculous and sinful." He doubted that witches could do anything. According to him, people are just deceiving themselves. In other words, folklore stories about Sabbaths and black masses are not facts, but figments of the imagination. Becker's logic angered the Orthodox so much that he was accused of atheism and recalled from the parish. But all over Europe, up to London and Paris, his book was selling faster than witch fodder. Thus, until the end of the era of the witch hunt, thinkers did not lock themselves into academic circles, but waged a struggle. They wrote treatises, argued in scientific languages, and even risked their reputations to show that the world was simpler and clearer than they thought in the flames of bonfires.
What unites all these stories is purely human. Fear of the unknown is one of the strongest instincts. When people see a crop failure or a black cat waving a handkerchief in the wind, the devil often appears in their imagination. And then the crowd starts looking for a black cat among the neighbors. Witches became convenient scapegoats. The old ladies of the neighborhood were blamed for the troubles, as we today look for the guilty, succumbing to our fears. Philosophers have noticed that fear and rage are contagious. The more people are afraid, the louder the crowd whispers, ready to believe in any scary tales. But the thinkers pointed out a different way. They had to convince themselves over and over again that knowledge overcomes fear. Weyer restored the voice of the dying women, explaining to them what was happening to them. Hobbes showed that true order is based not on miracles and fear, but on common sense and clear laws. Descartes taught that even the most frightening myth can be reconsidered in our head. We just need to look at ourselves and the world carefully. Spinoza believed that if a person understands that everything obeys the inevitable laws of nature, then fear will disappear. After all, horror lies not in reality, but in the fact that we do not understand it. Becker put a thought in people's hearts. All these stories are fictions. We can always ask God or look around and the difference will become obvious. Their views are a kind of psychological therapy of the era. What scared the people and kept them in check began to be criticized and medically examined by the mind. Scientists said, "Fear is the killer of hope, the enemy of reason. The courage to explore and compassion heal the soul." They called the brutal witch hunt an example of mass psychosis, when a crowd becomes hysterical and sweeps away all people they don't understand. But every scientist, every mathematician, every thinking person added a drop of reason to the ocean of fear. Thanks to this gradual enlightenment, the psychological landscape of the world was changing. People were more and more ready to face the facts. After all, a meteorologist will always find the cause of a storm, and a doctor will always find the cause of the disease, the philosophers argued. The world no longer seemed like a battlefield of witches and demons. Instead, every phenomenon was explained using logic. Fear might still live in people's souls, but now there were pathetic rays of enlightenment nearby. Weiser's books, Descartes' discussions, Spinoza's treatises. They taught us to think differently, to replace memories of bonfires with pages of books. So, the spirit of reason slowly made its way through the asphalt of ignorance. Philosophers and scientists of modern times have shown themselves not just as thinkers, but also as a kind of healers of the mind. They said, "Don't be afraid. Feel free to question the familiar." Today, we look at the witch hunt as a scary tale from the past. Many innocent people died in the flames of those fires, but along with them, a considerable part of those ghosts that kept humanity in check were burned. The great minds of that time, often risking their reputation and safety, broke the shackles of superstition. They did for the West what fire does for a tree. What was burned gave rise to new life. And although the process was slow and painful, the result is undeniable. Instead of fear and ignorance, cities of science, epistemology, education, in a word, the light of scientific knowledge, have grown up. And now, having learned the story of these philosophers, each of us can remember that even in the darkest times, knowledge overcomes fear. After all, thought, like the dawn, sooner or later dispels the darkest shadows.